Okay, where did we leave off? Okay, so what's consciousness? Okay, state of being awake. Can we have an altered state of consciousness while awake? Yeah. We can do things like
The driving thing.
the driving thing. Okay, so that's sort of broken consciousness when we drive. What's the most common altered state that we experience? Sleep, right? All right, so what happens when we sleep? We dream in what stage of sleep? We dream in all of them. But where are our dreams most vivid, bizarre? REM, right? What does REM stand for? Rapid eye movement sleep. What is the other stages of sleep are other stages of sleep or what? Non-REM, right? Non-REM, non-rapid eye movement. What are micro sleeps?
When your body makes itself go to sleep even though you're trying to stay awake.
Okay, your body make you fall asleep for a little bit. Okay, what happens to us when we are sleep deprived? In the corner, will you guys shut that door for me? Will you shut that door behind you? I have a loud voice and I've been told that I should shut my doors because my voice is loud. That's all right. You just made it. What was my question? What happens to us when we are sleep deprived? Yes, lacking sleep. Can't concentrate. In particular, what types of tasks are most affected when we are sleep deprived? Simple tasks, right? It's like our body knows that we don't have to pay that much attention to these tasks. They're so easy, but they're the ones that are most negatively affected. More complex, more difficult tasks, we still attend to them in great detail. So they end up being less affected. Why is sleep so important when it comes to memories? Okay, let's use this sort of psychological terminology. Formed. Right? Formation of memories. Sleep seems to play a very important role in the formation of memories. What's the adaptive theory of sleep? According to the adaptive theory, why do we sleep? Good, to avoid predators, right? Which is the explanation for why it is that we sleep at night. What does the restoration theory say about sleep? Right, we sleep to repair our body, right? While we are asleep, our bodies is repairing all the damage that we've done to it throughout the day. So we started talking about stages of sleep. Talked about sleep disorders, nightmares, REM behavior deficit, sleepwalking, night terror. Oh yeah, we watched the video. Okay, you can't see. Insomnia we talked about. Did we talk about narcolepsy? Okay, what is narcolepsy? Okay, randomly fall asleep at different points during the day. Sleep disorder where a person falls immediately into REM sleep. And it can occur anytime, can occur during the day without any sort of warning. Cataplexy is a term that's used when there's a sudden loss of muscle tone. So somebody, sort of the muscle tone has kept them upright. They fall immediately into REM sleep. It impacts about 1 out of every 2,000 individuals has narcolepsy. Yeah?
My sister, well, it's not the same as like passing out, is it? Is that like?
Depends on why they've passed out.
Well, they tell the doctors now, like she's been passing out for like a year. Like she'll just pass out. Like she'll just be like walking the dog or like going to class or something, and she just passes out. Is that similar to that? Nobody can figure out what's wrong.
Yeah. So actually, they have in the past few months started talking more and more about this. Somebody just told me, a friend of mine in California a number of years ago was in the bathroom and fell and hit his head, and he had no recollection of like what had happened. So if there's a sudden movement up to down, something happens really quickly in your brain chemistry that can cause you to pass out. I will get back to that question on Thursday. There is actually, I can't remember the exact reason. There is a reason.
Yeah, they said it might be like psychological, but like.
I don't know about that. I mean, it could be, but.
She's been to like
Okay. I've heard an answer, and I'll tell you. I will ask. I know who to ask because I had this conversation with them. I'll ask and see if they can remember what we're talking about. Yeah. Okay. So some of the sleep disorders that we've talked about. Somnambulism, and what we're talking about is sort of this sleepwalking. Somebody may sit up in their sleep. They may begin to walk around. They perform complex behaviors, like in the video we saw where she's making a sandwich, all while still very deeply asleep. Night terrors, extreme fears experienced still while asleep. A great deal of agitation and screaming, all again while completely asleep. The restless leg syndrome is this uncomfortable sensation that people may have in their legs, causes them to move around a lot, and they end up not sleeping very well. They lose sleep. Nocturnal leg cramps are these painful cramps in calves and foot muscles. Hypersomnia is excessive daytime sleepiness. You? All right. Circadian rhythm disorders are the disturbances in that sleep-wake cycle that people have. Again, this is common in people who are jet lagged, so they've been flying across to different time zones and their body's experiencing that sort of disruption, or people who do shift work. And the problem they found with shift work is somebody may work 9 to 5 for a week or two, and then they get moved to a graveyard shift and then back to 9 to 5 and graveyard shift, stuff like that. That is a sort of shift work that people have, and their body experiences this intense disruption in the sleep-wake cycle as a result of that. So one of the things they've encouraged, I'll get right to you. One of the things they've encouraged is you maintain like a week or two at a time on a particular shift, and then you would switch to another shift. So you're not constantly flip-flopping your body around for when you're asleep and when you're awake.
So if somebody scares someone out of their sleep, is that considered night terror?
No. Like being scared out of your sleep?
Like just scream and then you just scream like a girl or something like that. Is that considered night terror?
I don't think I'm following you.
Like, alright, I'm asleep. Someone comes and scares the crap out of me, just yells, and then I just
Do you wake up?
I mean, you could.
Yes, that usually wouldn't be a night terror. No. Night terror is this intense experience that people have still while deeply asleep. So if something happens to disrupt your sleep, to wake you up or something, it wouldn't be like a traditional night terror.
Aren't night terrors more visual? Like the person is awake, but they're in sort of a sleep paralysis. My one friend says that he experiences night terrors every single night. Normally, his descriptions are he's fully awake, but he can't move, and he just sees like very dark shadows moving towards him in the room.
We will get to that. That is not night terror.
Oh, it isn't?
No. That is actually transitioning out of REM sleep to waking up. When people, it's not sleep paralysis. REM paralysis you're talking about?
I think it's called sleep paralysis.
It's REM paralysis. Like when you are experiencing that REM sleep, you lose control of your voluntary muscles, right? You experience this paralysis so that you're not acting out your dreams. But what you're describing, we'll talk about at the end, people typically when they're coming out of REM sleep and they're still dreaming, they may experience this paralysis. This is also a time when they report ghostly visitations from dead relatives, stuff like that.
Well, it's not. He didn't even say it was dead relatives. It's just like.
It's not always that. I'm just saying that's one common theme that people think they've had this visit from the other side. It's what's happening is they're waking up, but still transitioning out of that dream stage, so they're confusing the two. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What are we talking about? Okay, and then wetting the bed still later in life is obviously a sleep disorder that somebody might have when they should no longer be wetting the bed. So why do we dream? Why do you think we dream? Yeah.
I think it's for our brain to know that it's still functioning, it's giving the brain something to do while we're sleeping.
Okay. All right. Gives our brain something to do while we're sleeping?
It
Yeah.
tries to prove its own existence, kind of.
Okay.
Isn't it just our mind interpreting activity in other parts of the mind?
Okay, very good. Yeah, that's kind of the modern day view of what's going on is that there's still activation coming from the brainstem, and it's reaching the cortex, right? The meaning-making parts of our brain. And what our brain is doing as it's receiving these random signals is putting it all together. And it puts it together in this sort of bizarre experience we have that we've labeled dreaming. But Freud had a very different idea when it came to dreams, right? In Freud's big book was the interpretation of dreams. What did Freud argue about your dreams?
That's what we secretly want to do, like in real life.
Okay, all right, good. So Freud talked about the actual content of the dream itself, and he referred to this as the sort of manifest content. What was literally in the dream, okay, in the dream itself. But also what Freud said is that we need to look further than that, right? What do those images, those experiences you have in your dream, what do they truly represent? What's the sort of hidden meaning in all of these different dreams you're having, right? So Freud, somebody maybe that's dreaming a lot about, I don't know, telephone poles or something like this. What might Freud say?
Wasn't everything just for some reason sexual with him?
Yeah, so roll with it. If you're dreaming about all these telephone poles, what's he going to say? Sexually deprived, right? You need to have sex, whatever, right? You're being deprived, and that's the true meaning of what the dream is that you're experiencing. Yes, it's not directly in your dream, okay? The manifest content is directly what is in your dream. It's the latent construct, that hidden stuff behind it that we should really pay attention to. Or somebody that's dreaming of...
Yeah, I've heard of people trying to change.
Yeah, there is some ideas about how people do that. Okay, let me finish this and go to the next slide, and I can kind of maybe hit that a little bit. So the activation synthesis hypothesis is what we were talking about earlier. It explains that what's happening is our dreams are created by the higher centers of our cortex, right? And what is happening is they are receiving messages from the brain stem while sleeping, and they need to make sense of what it is that they're receiving. And all of this is sort of combined into this dream that we experience. Yeah.
So what happens to people who don't dream? Like my mom always says she doesn't dream.
She probably just doesn't remember them. Do you remember all your dreams?
Most of the time.
Yeah? Okay. You're lucky. I don't always remember my dreams. Very rarely do I remember my dreams anymore.
It just like vanishes kind of.
Yeah, you can have a very vivid dream in the middle of the night and you think, I got to remember this, and you wake up and it's gone, right? You can't remember it. All right. So this idea is that what's happening in our brainstem is released up to the cortex. It's receiving these messages. Right? This is where all of our complex thought processes are housed. So they continue to receive these messages even while we are asleep, and it puts it all together. Right? So these random activations that are occurring are all put together, and what it does for us is to create these bizarre dreams that we have while we're asleep. So here we go. The activation information mode model is a sort of revised version of that basic idea. And what it argues is that when we access particular information throughout the day that we're awake, while we're awake during the day, it can have an influence on the synthesis of our dreams. So when we think about particular people, we can increase the likelihood that we'll dream about them. Does that make sense? What we become exposed to during the day cannot kind of all play a role in sort of the way that our mind puts this dream together. So according to this idea, if you wanted to dream about particular things, you would want to think about them often to increase the likelihood that you would experience a dream about that particular incident. Make sense? So if you hadn't seen somebody for a while from like high school or something, you ran into them throughout the day and you thought about them all day long, according to this model, it would increase the likelihood that perhaps you would dream about that person that night, right? So the information that we expose ourselves to during the day can impact what we dream about later. Questions on dreams? All right, hypnosis is another altered state of consciousness, right? So we have this state of consciousness where the person becomes especially susceptible to suggestions. So they'll do things that they won't normally do. Okay, so there's a lot of confusion about what happens when people are hypnotized. How does it work? Why does it work? The real key to hypnosis, though, seems to be this heightened state of suggestibility. There are 4 key elements that occur during a hypnosis session. One is that the hypnotist is going to tell the person to focus on exactly what is being said. Right? So focus on what's being said. person is told to feel relaxed, right? To feel tired, to sort of slip away a little bit. The hypnotist tells the person to let go and accept these suggestions easily. And the person is encouraged and told to use a sort of vivid imagination for what they are going to experience. So not everyone is going to be a good person to be hypnotized. There are some differences amongst us in our sort of susceptibility to being hypnotized. So hypnic susceptibility is all about the extent to which this person would make a good hypnotic subject. Right? Whether they can be hypnotized easily or whether it takes, if they're not somebody who's going to be easily hypnotized. So how would we measure something like this? These are some of the example items that you might see for whether somebody is a good person to be hypnotized. Movement of the body back and forth, closing their eyes and being unable to open them, fingers locked together, one arm locked into a particular position, responding to post-hypnotic suggestions, loss of memory for events during the hypnotic session, unable to state one's own name during the session, and seeing or hearing non-existent stimuli. These would be the sorts of things that would suggest this person's under, right? That this person is experiencing a hypnotic state. Okay, so what can hypnosis do and what can hypnosis not do? What it can do is it can create amnesia for whatever has happened during the hypnotic session. Right? At least for a brief period of time, people aren't going to remember what it was that happened. It can relieve pain. It allows somebody to sort of remove the conscious attention that they are applying to this experience of pain. So moving their conscious attention away from the experience of pain. Hypnosis can do that. After-sensory perceptions. It can affect these sort of after-sensory perceptions. So things like smelling something that's not there, hearing something that's not there, vision, time sense, the ability to see visual illusions can all be affected by hypnosis. Help people relax in situations that normally would cause them a great deal of stress, right? Like flying on an airplane for somebody who is very frightened of flying on an airplane. It can help them in those situations. What it cannot do, hypnosis is not going to give you superhuman strength. People may use like their full strength while they're during this hypnotic session, but it's not any more than they would have had prior to coming to the hypnotic session itself. Doesn't give you any extra strength beyond what you already possess. It cannot reliably enhance memory, right? So having an eyewitness or whatever put under hypnosis to recall a childhood memory of some particular kind, no. Right? There's an increased risk of false memory retrieval because of this sort of heightened suggestive state that people are in. So when you do something like this, you can increase the likelihood. Answer that in a second. I thought you were going to go somewhere else with it.
Is that even able, or if they were trying to make them harm themselves?
No, people tend to not do that, which leads into a theory of what happens when we're hypnotized. So I'll get to that in a second. Okay. So it cannot regress people back to childhood. You're not going to act like a newborn, like have an experience of being a newborn again while under hypnosis. You might act like a child, but it's not bringing you back to the state that you experienced, however old you guys are. What are you, 18, 22, 20 years ago? And say things that children would not. And finally, it cannot regress people back to some past life experience, right? There's no scientific evidence that's come about from this idea that we can take people back to past life experiences, right? That they're able to tap into this past life that they lived, several hundred years ago. Doesn't work like that. Okay, so here we go. Why does this sort of thing work? Part of the idea is hypnosis as dissociation, that we experience this sort of break. Very similar to what we talked about with the driving, right? The sort of break in consciousness that we experience while driving. The same sort of thing applies here. It works because only in this sort of immediate situation, this immediate consciousness that we are experiencing, that there is going to be this sort of hidden observer. There is somebody that's remaining awake while all of this is going on. So nobody can put you under hypnosis and have you go commit a murder, or put you under hypnosis and have you self-inflict harm upon yourself, right? And the idea being that it only happens in the sort of immediate consciousness. There is some part of you that remains aware of what you are doing. So to encourage somebody to engage in destructive or harmful behaviors isn't going to happen because this is not going to let you do those things.
What if there's a part of you that's conscious while it's going on? How can you not remember it?
It's not the part that's in the immediate situation. It's not the part that's processing everything in the moment. But there is some part of you that's not going to let you murder your ex or something.
It was a good question.
What's that?
It was like a serious question. I just wasn't sure. I didn't
I'm not. This is a fine question. I'm not knocking your question at all. The other idea is this social cognitive theory of hypnosis. This is the basic idea here, is that we all know what a hypnotized person is supposed to act like. Yes? And while under hypnosis, we assume that role. So because we have this knowledge or this sort of expectation for the behaviors that are typical of somebody who is hypnotized, what they would engage in, when we are falling under hypnosis, we play the part, right? Like we're an actor, an actress, and we take on the role that we associate that somebody under hypnosis would be like, right? We have expectations for what we would do in what somebody does in this type of situation, and we assume that sort of role and play the part. You with me? All right. So the hidden observer idea, that we have this dissociation, much like we experience while driving, right? That break in consciousness that happens to us when we're doing something that's very sort of automatic for us now. And the idea that we just play the part. We'll play the role of whatever it is that is expected of us. If we have time, I'll show these later. Okay, questions on hypnosis? Let's move to talking a little bit about psychoactive drugs. So people can sleep, they can daydream, we can meditate, we can go under some type of hypnotic state, all as a means to achieve some type of altered state of consciousness. The other thing we do is we use drugs, right? We take drugs that give us an altered state, provide us with an altered state of consciousness. We're not talking just about the sort of illicit use of drugs, but the effectiveness of drugs that we use, like the drugs you take so that you can go under for a surgery, right? It puts you in an altered state of consciousness. You don't want to be awake while these sorts of things are happening, right? People are able to deal with pain, to deal with injuries because of these drugs. Sleep disorders, ADHD, all sort of addressed using different types of drugs, right? But what we have to remember is that the helpfulness of these drugs is important, but we can't look past the negative side of a lot of these drugs, right? Things like physical dependence that can come about from the use of drugs, right? What are signs that we would look for to see if somebody is sort of experiencing this physical dependence? One is this compulsive use. If it's available, they have to use it, right? So an inability to be around a drug and not feel like they have to use it, right? So this compulsive use of it. If it's in my environment, I'm gonna use it. This loss of control. They can't stop using it. So maybe they've gotten the high that they want, but they cannot stop continuing to use it. So they use it until it is gone, or they can no longer function to finish the drug. And then the third issue would be disregard for the consequences of use, right? So nothing else matters to this particular person other than at this moment using this particular drug, right? So they're going to lie. They're going to hurt other individuals. They're going to steal. They'll lose their job, unable to pay rent. Nothing else matters. So the consequences of the use, they're not paying attention to these things. That's not what's important for them. Tolerance is when more and more of the drug is needed to achieve the same effect, right? So somebody who is using heroin, the first few times they use it, they may need a small amount. But as they continue in their cycle of drug use, they're going to need more and more of the drug. As their body becomes tolerant of the drug, they're going to need more and more to achieve that high. Eventually, as they use it, they may just start to feel normal. But to achieve the high, they're going to need more and more. There is a drug that works a little different than this, where you don't need. You could be used to this high, and I want more and more of this high, so I am therefore going to smoke more to get that high. You with me? All right. So withdrawal is those sort of physical symptoms that people have as they're trying or as what they experience when they are no longer, when they don't have that addictive drug in their system. So when somebody is addicted to a chemical and they're not giving it to their body, they're going to experience these negative side effects, these things that we call withdrawal, right? Nausea, being very sick, the pain that they can feel associated with it, tremors, crankiness, high blood pressure, all resulting from not having this body in their system, this drug in their system. And we'll talk about this, but this is sort of negative reinforcement, right? Reinforcement and punishment are kind of two sides of a coin, but within each one, there are different types of punishment, there's different types of reinforcement. But reinforcement as a whole, when we have a pleasant experience, it increases the likelihood that we're going to engage in that behavior again in the future. For most of us, we always think about reinforcement as sort of positive reinforcement, right? As a kid or whatever, you may have mowed the grass or whatever, done chores around the house, and you got an allowance at the end of the week, right? If you did your chores, you got your allowance. So if you engaged in this behavior, you were rewarded for that behavior. So you engaged in some behavior and were rewarded for it. Negative punishment, something is taken away, and it's going to increase the likelihood that you engage in that behavior in the future. So when you're hungover and you take ibuprofen, you are removing something uncomfortable from the environment, your hangover, yes? Increases the likelihood that you'll engage in that behavior in the future. Your mom might nag you to do the dishes. You finally break down and do the dishes. Why did you do them? Because the nagging mom was removed from the environment, right? Negative reinforcement. Something unpleasant was removed away from the environment, increasing the likelihood that you would engage in that behavior in the future. This is how withdrawal works. Why is somebody experiencing withdrawal going to use the drug? So the withdrawal ends, so that these symptoms disappear. Increases the likelihood the next time I experience withdrawal, what do? I take the drug. It helps get rid of these negative experiences I'm having at this particular moment in time. All right? So negative reinforcement. We can have psychological dependence, where maybe we don't actually have a physiological addiction to it, but we have this sort of psychological dependence here. We feel that we need the drug, right? That we need the drug to continue some emotional well-being or psychological well-being. This is positive reinforcement here with psychological dependence. I have this emotional feeling that I want. To obtain that emotional well-being feeling, I take the drug. I take the drug, I feel better, right? You with me? As a result, it becomes positive reinforcement. I'm introducing something into the environment that I like, the feeling the drug gives me, right? That emotional well-being that I associate with that particular drug. Okay, so let's talk about different classifications of drugs. Stimulants, right? Stimulants, they don't give you any extra energy. They burn up any energy reserves that you might have. What they do is they increase the functioning of our nervous system. So things like amphetamines, right? Uppers, drugs that are synthesized, amphetamines are synthesized, they're made in a lab rather than sort of found out in nature, right? Who's a frequent abuser of amphetamines? Not like, oh, that's me, Dr. Hackett. That's not what I mean. Like, what individuals, what occupation are frequent abusers of amphetamines? What? I don't know. Is that true? I don't know. I heard it over here. Truckers, right? Why are truckers frequent abusers of amphetamines?
Before they put the limits on how far they can drive, they drive like East Coast to West Coast and back. So.
Drive all night with amphetamines, right? They were very common abusers of amphetamines. I don't know about pharmacists.
I thought it was just because, like,
Their access to it?
yeah, easy access.
I don't know.
Sorry, my bad.
It's all good. Cocaine is another one, right? Cocaine is a natural drug. It produces a euphoric state, makes people happy, gives people the sense that I have a lot of energy, makes people feel powerful, and they feel good while taking the drug. So, what's up with Coca-Cola? What was in Coca-Cola at one time? Cocaine, right? It was. Who said that? They? 20s or 30s or something? Yeah. Used to.
Was that like a Pablo Escobar thing? Like, wasn't he responsible at some point, or a partner in Coca-Cola, and that's how he was getting Coke?
I don't know. Oh, I don't know.
Because like Medellin, wasn't that the company responsible?
I don't know the details. Yeah. All right. when they've done work with rats, they essentially are allowing rats to use cocaine, right? The rat can press a lever to get food, they can press a lever to get drink, or they can press a lever to get some cocaine. What do you think they're choosing? They're choosing cocaine. To the point of starvation and dehydration, they will go for the cocaine, right? Okay, so stimulants, they are going to increase the functioning of the nervous system. Nicotine, right? Nicotine is another stimulant. About 430,000 people die every year from smoking-related illnesses, as I'm sure you probably already know. Nicotine is the active ingredient in tobacco. Nicotine was also used. What is the sort of history of nicotine? What else was it used for? Do you know? It's had a lot of mixed uses. It was used as like a way to kill weeds and stuff like that as in the past. It is toxic, right? As you probably know. So the first time you smoked, you would have felt very sick. It's toxic, right? You've introduced something toxic to your body, which is why you feel sick, right? All right, so it's an active ingredient in tobacco, produces a sense of rush for people, the sense of heightened arousal. Raises blood pressure and accelerates the heart. For women, the number one reason they indicate they smoke is that it speeds up their metabolism. It is addictive for 99% of the people who use it. It is more addictive than heroin, and it's more addictive than alcohol for people. What's the best way to stop smoking? What's that? Okay. Let's say we're past that step. It's not the best way.
Reduce how much nicotine you take in a day.
Okay. All right, you're getting closer. Oh, yes, that is part of the process. Delayed smoking is what they encourage. So if somebody's a smoker and they wake up and first thing in the morning, if they have a cigarette, what would delayed smoking be about? Okay, wait as long as you can to have that first cigarette of the day, right? So maybe month one, you work on it before lunch. You have the first cigarette of the day before lunch. And as you progress, it gets later and later and later and later. So eventually that you wouldn't need it. You guys know John Mellencamp, the singer? Yeah. He had a heart attack a few years ago, and he was smoking 5 packs of cigarettes a day. He was waking up in the middle of the night to smoke.
My mom and Nana, they were both smokers, and they actually went to like this doctor, I guess, who hypnotized them to quit smoking, and they had to like come home every night and listen to his voice, like on a, what was it, on a cassette, like a Walkman kind of thing. And then, like, my mom hasn't smoked in like over 10 years, but my dad went because he was a smoker, and he ended up falling asleep during the class, and he still smokes.
Okay.
So I guess it worked. I mean,
Did your mom still listen to the tape?
no. Like, she had listened to it for, I don't know, maybe like 60 days, and it was like only like 20 minutes a night, and she hasn't touched a cigarette since.
All right.
So I don't know if it works for everybody. Obviously not.
Okay, so a couple things here, right? Your mom may be highly susceptible to hypnotism.
She probably is.
She strikes you as somebody who is. So, two is that like it gave her extra motivation.
That's what it was. Like,
Two.
she already wanted to quit smoking, and I think she was just like, I don't know, maybe it just like reinforced her.
Yeah.
And she just wanted to quit smoking so bad, she like gave in to that.
Yeah. It always helps to do it in pairs too. Like bring a friend with you
Yeah.
to quit doing these things. My older brother smoked for a while, and the woman that he was living with, they married and divorced, but they were both heavy smokers, and he was not. Like, it was going to take two,
Yeah.
right? He wasn't going to be able to stop unless she stopped because of, like, so it takes two, right? Makes it sort of normative expectations here. All right, so delayed smoking is encouraged as the best way to try and do it. So delay when you have that first cigarette of the day. We all know about the harmful effects of nicotine. Many people continue to smoke or chew tobacco in spite of these warnings. The Surgeon General updated the warning last year or the year before. Smoking is even worse than you were told as a kid. they've updated this warning, right? It's even worse than we thought that it was. Why do people continue to smoke? It's addictive, but why do we even start? Smoking's on the decline. In the 60s, about 40% of the American public smoked. It's now about 25%. However, it is going up in two demographics. Frequency of smoking is up in women and it's up in children.
For children, peer pressure.
All right, peer pressure, image builder. When we talk about social psychology, we'll talk about how death warnings are ineffective. They actually encourage people to smoke.
Could be stress.
Stress. Okay. People aren't sure how to effectively manage stress and feel like smoking helps them manage it.
My friends normally either smoke like after whenever they've had like a lunch to drink or normally after sex. Like they always say that just a cigarette always helps for everything.
Okay, so like some type of social situation encourages it.
I don't know, would that be social or would that just be like a mindset afterwards?
Well, there are people who just smoke socially, like they would never smoke in their car or go outside of their apartment or house to have a cigarette, but they do smoke when they're out with their friends. And it could be that people have associated it too. Like I smoke when I drink, right? They just made that association between the two. What? All right. So despite all these warnings, we do see for at least two groups, it continues to move up. And probably the most frequently abused or used, at least, stimulant is caffeine, right? Coffee, tea, a lot of sodas, chocolate, a lot of over-counter drugs can have caffeine, right? There's this idea that drinking a lot of caffeine is going to sober you up, right? So if you have that drunk friend and you need to sober them up, you have them drink a bunch of coffee. What are you going to have on your hands? You're going to have a wide awake drunk friend, right? It doesn't sort of sober you up any faster, right? So the idea that I can just drink a bunch of caffeine and I'll be good to drive, that's a terrible decision, right? Or all I need is my friend to drink a bunch of coffee and he'll be okay. That's not how it works, right? All right, so some of the common levels of caffeine and things. Brewed coffee has about 6120 milligrams of caffeine. Decaffeinated coffee only has about 2 to 4. Espresso has 30 to 50 milligrams. Tea brewed for 1 minute has 9 to 33. Tea brewed 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and as you see, the more you brew it, the stronger the concentration gets. So you can see different levels here. Yeah.
So, when you said caffeine doesn't sober you up, is that like while you're drunk? But like if you have a hangover, would that like help with the headache or anything like that?
All right. The best way to cure a hangover is water. Right? Hydrating your body. A lot of times, coffee and stuff like that can actually dehydrate your body a little bit. It's probably not the best thing to do. Water and sleep it off is what you really need to do. The water replenishes a lot of the stuff you deprive your body of.
Is it possible we can like null the caffeine, like the effects of it? Because I can drink like 3 monsters before I go to bed and it won't affect me at all.
You're not supposed to do that.
I know, but I'm just saying
Yeah.
like that's.
Yeah, I think over time you can adjust the amount of caffeine. Yeah, that you take.
So like if you have like a lot of caffeine, you just become neutral to it. Like it doesn't bother you at all.
You get a headache when you don't have caffeine.
Yeah, that is
Right? This doesn't have a normal effect. You can probably feel like that if you wanted. Okay, so another classification of drugs. Depressants. What depressants do is that they decrease the functioning of your nervous system. So things like barbiturates, right? Depressant drugs that have a sort of sedative effect. For people who overdose on barbiturates, what has happened is that their breathing and heart can actually stop. They have depressed the functioning of their nervous system so much that they see these results. Heath Ledger, the Joker from The Dark Knight, he had 6 different types of depressants in his system when they did the toxicology report. Right? So you had that interaction, and what it did is depress the nervous system so much that we saw these sorts of things happening. Benzodiazepines, drugs that lower anxiety, reduce stress in people, things like Valium, Xanax, right? And the other drug that is not uncommon for people to see is the rape drug, roofies, right? They all operate by impacting the functioning of our nervous system. So things like sleeping pills, these sorts of things can become very addictive for people. And in particular, mixing these things with like alcohol becomes a very toxic interaction for people. alcohol as a depressant. Most people don't think alcohol is a depressant. Why do they not think alcohol is a depressant?
Because at first, whenever you start drinking, you get like that buzz. It doesn't. You feel energized.
Yeah. Most people think that it's like a stimulant or something, right? It makes me excited, makes me happy. I do things I wouldn't normally do. Now I'm dancing on this table, acting the fool. I wouldn't normally do that, right? What is the first thing alcohol depresses? What? Inhibitions, right? That I'm not going to stand on this table and shake it like a fool. Goes away, right? So people act very differently because their inhibitions become depressed.
Is that the reason why people get really emotional? Like when they're really drunk and they just feel like they have to talk like their feelings out and stuff like that?
Oh, you mean the inhibitions? You could, yeah, I see what you're saying. I shouldn't go cry to my friends about
No, they
this
do
girl that
cry.
broke my heart.
They do cry to their friends when they're drunk.
Yeah, right. What I'm saying is that part of them that says, I'm not going to go to my male friends and cry to them about this girl that broke my heart, it's gone. So now I go to my male friends and I cry to them about the girl that broke my heart. That's what you're saying, right? Yeah, that's what you see, right? These sort of inhibitions go away. But it is a depressant. GABA is released, that the neurotransmitter, this is the level of the neurotransmitter that it becomes impacted with. So the brain's functioning becomes more and more inhibited. We're slowing down, it becomes depressed. So eventually somebody's so intoxicated, they have a hard time even moving, right? Our reaction time is incredibly slowed under alcohol, which is why we have laws like don't drink and drive, right? Because your reaction time is incredibly slow. It's a very dangerous situation to put yourself in and the other people out on the road, right? Okay, so it impacts us and slows down what's going on. Some of the other effects we see with alcohol, things like fetal alcohol syndrome, which is what? Okay, drinking while pregnant, right? It impacts the developing fetus, impacts it obviously in a negative way. Whatever mom intakes, it typically is exposed to the child, right? So any sort of teratogen that you take, it has the ability to pass through the fetus and harm that fetus as well. Korsakoff syndrome is a form of dementia that is brought about through alcoholism. It's associated with intense use of alcohol. Yeah.
For kids with that, does that mean they're in what's that word? They're like they can't say like, oh, this is good and bad. Like they can't tell the difference between good and bad because of that. Like the inhibition. What is it?
Oh no. For kids that have fetal alcohol syndrome, their cognitive development seems to be really impaired. I don't know what you mean by right or wrong. Oh, you know what? Talking about inhibitions?
Yeah.
No. Okay, so what happens to us after a few drinks, right? So keep in mind that when we talk about a drink, okay, we're talking about either one can of beer at 4 or 5% alcohol, like, the typical beer that most college students would drink. Craft beer is going to have a little bit more. So if you drink something like Arrogant Bastard out of San Diego, that's going to have more. If you drink Dogfish Head, their 60-minute IPA, that's going to have more. Their 90-minute IPA is going to have a lot more. Most IPAs have a lot. Session IPA, I like IPAs. Session IPAs have lower alcohol content, but if it's not a session, it's going to have a lot of alcohol. So when we're talking about drink, we're talking about one can of beer, 12 ounces, 4 to 5% alcohol. One glass of wine, only 4 ounces, typically around 12% alcohol. Or we're talking about a shot of most liquors, and it's just 1 ounce, but it's 40 to 50% alcohol. Okay, so what happens to us with 1 to 2 drinks? Our blood alcohol level is now at about 0.05%. We have a feeling of well-being that's typically we're feeling good. We have this release of inhibitions. We're doing things that we would not normally do. We're crying to our friends. Our judgment becomes impaired, right? Making bad judgments about things. Our coordination and level of alertness is lowered. I thought that was like a air siren for a second. I was like, get your stuff. All right. And what happens here is increased risk of collision while driving, right? So just 1 to 2 drinks increases the likelihood of us getting into an accident. 3 to 5 drinks. Blood alcohol level at 0.1, right? Reaction time becomes significantly slow. So we are not reacting to things like we would prior to having any alcohol. Our muscle control and speech becomes impaired. Your friend doesn't move the same way, and they're saying some words that are slurred. They have limited night and side vision, also problematic if you get behind the wheel of a car. They have a loss of self-control. They're doing things they wouldn't normally do. Crash risk here is greatly increased for people, right? The likelihood of getting in an accident. 6 to 7 drinks. Blood alcohol level at 0.15%. It's consistent and major increases, consistent major increases in reaction time. We're consistently and very slow in how we react to things. 8 to 10 drinks. Now at a blood alcohol level of 0.20. We have a loss of equilibrium and technical skills. Can't stand. Our sensory and motor capabilities are heavily depressed. We can experience double vision, and for most people, they're experiencing legal blindness at this particular point. They are unfit to drive for up to the next 10 hours. You gotta let your body work it out. 10 to 14 drinks. Blood alcohol level 0.20 or 0.25. Staggering and severe motor disturbances. 10 to 14, blood alcohol level at 0.30%. They become not aware of their surroundings, confused about where they're at. 10 to 14 drinks, 0.35%. This is like what the level of anesthesia you would have prior to surgery is what you're experiencing here. Right? This is a lethal dosage for a small percentage of the population, meaning this is enough to kill them. 14 to 20 drinks, 0.40%. This is a lethal dosage for about 50% of the population. Severe circulatory and respiratory depression. You've heard about people who have fallen asleep in the back of a car who end up suffocating. They hunch down and they're unable to breathe. Alcohol poisoning and overdoses are common for people at that level of intoxication. So again, if you're drinking something other than like Bud Light, Miller Lite, Coors, like these sorts of staple beers, you're probably drinking something that's a little higher in alcohol content. So I've only had 3 or 4 beers, yet it doesn't quite apply to you because you're drinking something stronger. You with me? All right.
Does it have to be 10 hours?
That would be the recommendation, to not get behind the wheel of a car for 10 hours. Yeah. I have a friend that's a state trooper in Kentucky, and he pulled this group of kids over in a car. And he said, I got the kid out of the car, and he was so drunk he couldn't stand, the driver. And he's like falling on the back of the car and falling on the ground and stuff. And he's like, I finally get the kid upright, and he's like, you got to take a breathalyzer. And the kid's like, sure, no problem. He's like, he blows under the legal limit. I'm like, what is going on here? And his friends were like, he had his first beer a little while ago. And he's like, this kid was like so impacted. He's like, I legally can't arrest you, but like as a good citizen, I can't let you drive this car. So the kid like has this like conversation. He's like, will you just call my mom? And he's like, you know what? I am going to call your mom. So he gets his cell phone and calls his mom. And is like, yeah, I got your little guy here. Like he's hammered, but not legally hammered. You know, like I can't let him go. All right, so that's like one situation, right? But he said, I pulled this guy over, and he said he reeked of alcohol. But he passed every field sobriety test I could think to give him. And he said, I finally just flat out asked him, will you take a breathalyzer? And the guy's like, sure. And he blows way over the legal limit. And he's like, you're hammered. And the guy's like, I'm completely hammered. And he's like, the guy said, I'm a functioning alcoholic. This is how I live every day of my life. And he said, he pulled him over for like, nothing that was like, this guy's drunk. He pulled him over for like expired license tags or something like this. So not knowing like, this is what I'm going to encounter in this situation. He said the guy was completely intoxicated, but couldn't fail a field sobriety test. Passed them all, right? Our bodies adjust to what we do to it, okay? All right, so alcohol is the most commonly abused drug. So what is binge drinking? Yeah. Okay, drinking too much in a short amount of time. So quantify that for me, or operationally define for me, what is binge drinking? How much is too much, and what is the time frame? Yeah.
I would say like you drink like 10 beers in like 5 minutes. It's possible.
That is a lot of foam.
I believe it's like the amount is 2 hours, and for males, I think it's 5 drinks and 4 hours.
Bingo. There it is. Binge drinking. Yeah, time frame is 2 hours. For guys, it's 5 drinks in 2 hours. And for girls, it's 4 drinks in 2 hours. Are you kind of like squirming in your seat a little bit now? I don't know. That's how they define binge drinking. 5 drinks for men in 2 hours, and 4 drinks for women in 2 hours. I won't ask you why you're squirming. Okay. Narcotics, another classification of drugs. Narcotics, what they do is they slow down the action of the nervous system. For narcotics, the danger of interaction becomes really high because of how much it slows down. So narcotics, we're talking about a class of opium-related drugs. Suppresses our sensation of pain by binding to, and it stimulates the nervous system. So these are the drugs that are happening at the level of the neurotransmitter. We talked a little bit about this. So the endorphins, the things that keep us from feeling like aches and pains, you start artificially giving that to your body, right? So opium is derived from poppy seed, right? All narcotic drugs are coming from this. So morphine, right? Morphine was once called God's own medicine, right? What they found from morphine was that it was sort of incredible drug to treat severe pain, but it had some incredibly bad side effects. Heroin didn't have the negative side effects that we're seeing with things like morphine. So it is, as you know, heroin is extremely, extremely addictive, right? Our body, because you are artificially giving it this drug that operates at the neurotransmitter level, will stop producing endorphins. And we talked a bit about this already. So that's why people, when they are trying to quit using heroin, experience incredible pain. Their body hurts like nothing they've ever experienced before. Right? And it becomes really difficult for somebody to kick this habit. Psychogenic drugs, hallucinogens, right? These are drugs that induce some type of hallucination in us. It causes our brain to alter the interpretations of the senses that it is getting. So it's getting the sensory information, but our brain is interpreting that information in very different ways, right? So hallucinogens cause these false sensory experiences. We're seeing things that aren't really there, right? All these sort of false senses come about here. It alters individuals' perceptions of reality, and that's exactly what LSD does. It puts you in a world of your brain's making, right? And for many people, like the bad trip idea, it's not always good, right? Your brain does strange things with some of these drugs. PCP is a synthesized drug. What do you know about PCP? What happens to people who are on PCP? Yeah. They feel no pain. That's where the idea of the super strength comes from. It blocks the perception of pain for them. So it seems like they have this incredible strength. They're simply not feeling any pain. All right. It's an animal tranquilizer that's used. It causes all kinds of crazy stuff for people who have taken it. But really what it does for people is it suppresses any sensation of pain. So the idea of this incredible strength, that's where it's coming from. I'm going to quickly show you a couple of these videos because it's kind of interesting. This is some of these drugs. Can we use these drugs in an effective manner? In particular, a lot of it was military capabilities. Could the military use some of these drugs? Where's my skip button? Could we use some of these drugs in warfare? Okay, so first we'll watch the British government testing these things.
The drug was administered in a drink of water given at the start of each day's exercise. 25 minutes later, the first effects of the drug became apparent. The men began to relax and to giggle. But this man was more seriously affected and had to be removed from the exercise. After 35 minutes, one of the radio operators had become incapable of using his set. and the efficiency of the rocket launcher team was also very impaired. 10 minutes later, the attacking section had lost all sense of urgency. Notice the bunching and indecision as they enter a wood occupied by the enemy. Almost immediately, the section commander tried to use a map to find the location of troop headquarters, and a prisoner's escort had to have the way pointed out to him, although it was in plain sight, 700 yards away over open country. 50 minutes after taking the drug, radio communication had become difficult, if not impossible, but the men are still capable of sustained physical effort. However, constructive action was still attempted by those retaining a sense of responsibility in spite of physical symptoms. But 1 hour and 10 minutes after taking the drug, with one man climbing a tree to feed the birds, the troop commander gave up, admitting that he could no longer control himself or his men.
All right, so one more. Let's take a look at what the U.S. government was doing with some of we could do with acid.
The American military were also experimenting with LSD as a potential weapon.
Here is a group of normal soldiers responding directly to a series of routine drill commands. After receiving a small dose of LSD, they're confused and undisciplined.
The idea was to spray the drugs on enemy troops. The dose, however, proved rather difficult to control.
All right, so the idea that you aren't going to operate well under LSD. So if we can spray the enemy combatants with LSD, get them tripping, we can take them over rather easily, right? Well, okay, in theory, awesome idea. In practicality, like they couldn't figure out how to do it. The other one is like an old woman that is with this doctor. She takes acid and she's talking about her experience with acid. I'll show it to you some other time. Okay, so psychogenic drugs that are hallucinogens, things like marijuana, they cause a sense of relaxation and intoxication. So MDMA, ecstasy, designer drug that people use, it has a sort of stimulant experience, increases the function of the nervous system, and has hallucinatory effects as well. What they found about ecstasy is that it sits on your brain, right? The effects of this will probably not be seen for several years, but one theory is that it will start to sort of eat away at people's brains over time. Because it sits there, it doesn't seem to be flushed out like a lot of other drugs. And over time, we might start seeing effects with ecstasy that we didn't know existed.
What do they call it? A designer drug?
Like a lifestyle type thing, like commonly used like in raves and stuff like that. Did you hear it?
It was kind of like that with LSD too, like that sticks with you and then you trip at random times.
Acid will stick to your spinal cord.
Spinal cord, yeah, you can always look at it in a spinal tap. Yep. Stimulatory hallucinogens are drugs that produce this mixture of psychomotor stimulant and hallucinogenic effects. Things like mescaline, which is derived from the peyote cactus button. So a lot of Native American religious ceremonies involve the taking of mescaline. And they believe that it would allow them to speak to or have encounters with spirits. There were some kids in Oregon a number of years ago who got arrested and they had a bunch of mescaline on. We have freedom of religion in the United States. So if you have just been arrested with a bunch of drugs on you that some cultures have used for religious purposes, what do you say? I am a member of the Native American faith. You can't take this from me. I have freedom of religion. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. What did the Supreme Court say?
They can take the drugs away.
You're going to jail. Supreme Court didn't buy it at all. But mescaline, that's common use for mescaline. Psilocybin is hallucinogen found in certain mushrooms, right? So mushrooms that people eat cause these hallucinatory experiences. Faces melting off, signs bending and moving, those things that psilocybin does for people. Marijuana, as we talked about before, is often discussed as an hallucinogen. Many people don't see it that way. What does it alter? Time, like some movements seem slower, right? Those sorts of experiences are hallucinatory experiences. It has been found to have some incredible effects. For people who have the pain associated with multiple sclerosis, it is relieving pain there. Glaucoma is relieving pain there. It's been used for kids who experience seizures in an effective manner. It's illegal for most places around the country, right? So in Pennsylvania, there is talk not to legalize it for recreational use, hang tight, but for medical purposes. And there's a lot of evidence that suggests it should be used for medicinal purposes. That has a lot of positive effects. And of course, in places like Colorado, in Seattle, you can buy recreational marijuana there. But it's crazy because at the federal level, it is still classified as a level 1 drug, right? At the federal level, same as heroin, they put pot in the same level classification as heroin. You can't. It's crazy what's going on in Colorado. You can buy weed. You can't buy as much there as you can if you're a Colorado resident, but you can buy all kinds of weed, right? Whatever you want. But it's weird because there are federal laws about drug money for drug purposes. So a lot of these individuals can't take money from the shop directly and put it in the bank. They have to get like money orders and cashier's checks and then deposit that in the bank. So there's been an incredible number of robberies that occur at pot stores because they know that they've got a ton of cash on hand. So a lot of them have like private security patrolling the area now, so because of how common it is for people to rob these particular areas. So how these different drugs affect us. What are we talking about? You can look at this in a second. You can look at that on your own. Let's look at sort of use. Only through 2001 is what I can find. Let's use this one actually. If we look at frequency of use, ever used or used in the past month. Let's just look at high school seniors. For those who have used alcohol, almost 80% have used alcohol at some point during their life. In the past month, about 50% of high school students are indicating that they've been drinking. Seniors have been drinking. Tobacco, about 60% have indicated that they've tried it at some point in their life, with about 30% having used some type of tobacco product in the last 30 days. Marijuana, about 50%. I assume that's a little bit higher now than it was here. Have tried marijuana. In the last 30 days, about 25% of kids have used it. Cocaine, about 8% have high school seniors have tried cocaine, and like 2% have used it in the past month. Hallucinogens, about 13 to 14% of high school seniors have used hallucinogens, and 5% have used it in the past 30 days. All right, so here's getting back to some of these hallucination experiences that people report. We talked about the hypnagogic hallucinations, that we seem to experience these hallucinations that occur in stage 1 of sleep. Although people are asleep, most people, if you wake them up in stage 1, they will indicate that they were not asleep, right? Despite the fact that they have this sort of characteristics associated with falling asleep. Here's where we experience those sort of hypnotic jerks, the perception that I'm falling, these sorts of things. A lot of these sort of hallucinations that I've experienced, this out-of-body experience, this astral projection experience for a couple seconds, many people believe it occurs in this situation. And the other thing we were talking about earlier, the hypnopompic hallucinations. These are hallucinations that happen as a person is in between REM state, so they're experiencing these dreams. Remember, in rapid eye movement sleep, if you were to wake somebody, they're very likely to report that they were experiencing an intense dream. So they're in between REM and not yet fully awake. In these moments, a lot of people think that this is where our hallucinations come from. Seeing shadows on the walls, seeing our dead relatives, seeing aliens visiting us, leaving the room as I'm waking up. These sorts of things people think are experienced as we are transitioning out of this sleep stage or this dreaming stage, but not yet fully awake. Remember, REM is called paradoxical sleep. If we look at the electrical activity of the brain, it looks like we're awake, but we're not we're not actually awake. It's just that sort of simulation that's happening in our brain is like we are awake. But as we're transitioning from REM sleep into awake, right? For many people, our voluntary muscles are paralyzed here, but we are becoming awake. We're transitioning out of dreaming. Questions? All right, check it out. So for Thursday, we have our review for Exam 1, yes? My expectation for what you will do with Exam 1 study guide is you've already started to work on it, and when we meet together on Thursday, you will have very explicit questions about things that I can help clarify for you. Make sense? It's not a useful time if we come in and you just look at me like, What are we going to do? It's a much better experience if you come prepared to ask me questions. Yeah.
So, do we have to turn in the study guide?
No. No, it's all yours.
Okay.
I would encourage you to use it, but I don't need it.
Okay.
What are your questions about the study guide? Didn't you say you had questions?
Yeah, but if we're gonna go over them Thursday, it's okay. I just had like some things like circled and whatnot.
Okay.
Yeah, we can go over them Thursday.
We will.